Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this very special webinar broadcast from the UK, When You Become a Director, Your First 6 Actions. Today's webinar is co-presented by Laura Cantifer, Vice President, Grenzebach Gleer & Associates, and David Williams, Development Communications Manager from Durham University. So, you are a new development director. You might be hired in, promoted in-house, acting up, or be a dean taking responsibility for this area for the first time. So what are the first things you should do? Laura Cantifer works with GG&A and client Durham University in the UK as Interim Director of Development and Alumni Relations. She has been a new director 3 times. With over 25 years of experience in fundraising, she has led teams ranging in size from 3 to 78. Here she guides prospective new directors through things they should and should not do when they become a new director. She is joined today by David Williams, the Development Communications Manager at Durham. Our presenters welcome any questions you have during today's session and will answer those questions in the time remaining at the end of the hour. To address a question to Laura and David, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Select all participants from the drop-down menu and send us your questions. Any questions we do not answer today will be addressed in a follow-up message we send next week, along with a recording of the session, presentation slides, and a short survey to gain your feedback on GG&A webinars. Thank you all for joining us today. I will now turn it over to Laura and David to get us started.
Thanks, Catherine. And we'll take the next slide at this point. So, just for a little bit of context, David and I have been working together for 8 months here at Durham for the time that I've been in the interim role.
Today I've really got 2 roles. The first is to talk about how important internal communications is to a new director, looking particularly at the initiatives Laura put in place. And secondly, to try and ask some spectacularly naive journalistic type questions for those of us who have not been directors. So I guess the first question is, what's it like to come in? What's it like sort of emotionally to come in as a director?
Well, I say that David's actually on this to keep me honest and admit to some of the mistakes I've made. So that's just an important aside for you. David, I can tell you that each one of the 3 times I've been a new director, it has always been overwhelming. You're walking into a brand new situation. Everybody's wanting to tell me everything at once, right away, before I even know where the coffee or tea is. I think it's really important to note that you feel this incredibly immediate pressure to make everything better, to fix it all right away. And really, you don't even know what you're trying to fix, and already you feel like you're not doing something.
So in preparation for today, what I asked Laura to do really was come up with the top things that she felt any new director had to address straight away. And she came up with 6.
No magic number.
Not a magic number in any way, but the top 6 things that from her own experience or her own instinct or observation she needed to do. The second area I asked about were the big mistakes that either she had made or she had seen others made or she could see were common pitfalls. So we're going to go through those as well, and then we're going to have a summary at the end, plus questions, of course. So if we can have the next slide.
And the next one, please. So, number 1, learn your institution. I think here, allowing time to really absorb and evaluate, regardless of the pressure that you feel to act, it's important to try to steal some time to learn your institution. Hopefully, you all have been recruited with your own management style in mind, but if you've never been in a leadership role before, it might be that you're really developing a style as you go. If that's the case, really take time to assess the culture. It's important to read the clues around you, gauge what type of leadership style the institution is used to at this point. Are people formal, informal? Are meetings set up and planned a long time in advance? Are they more ad hoc? Really just read the clues around you. You'll be operating on several levels in terms of your management. One is your interaction with those above you. Another is with your colleagues. Remember that as you're learning. They might be different. What's happening above you, what's happening at your level, what's happening with the team below you. so you'll really have to adapt given that context. Senior management and academic strengths. It's critical to quickly learn what they are. You'll really want to build on them to be sure you're promoting the strengths of the institutions in everything that you do. Key partners, internal and external. That's important to keep in mind too. Who's fundraising and how is your team supporting their efforts? Here at Durham, for example, we've got 16 colleges. So it's not just fundraising that's taking place from the center, but it's actually fundraising in each of those colleges in very different ways. Are all these fundraising efforts aligned? Do you need to roll their activities into your own to strengthen that alignment, to think about what kind of impact what they're doing has on what you're doing? The aim is always to align your fundraising to the university's strategic objectives, but those may or may not be clearly articulated. So it's really worth taking that time in the beginning to assess the situation right away. If you can, and this is quite frankly the tricky part, build that time into your schedule to absorb what's happening around you and what you're learning so you can adjust your activities based on concrete knowledge that you've gained by making observations.
So, I mean, just to ask about that process, there seems to be a big tension between the emotional pressure to act and to be seen to be the new director and the need to learn the institution, and I guess it's balancing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good word there, balancing, because it's a balancing act between trying to decide when to act and when to continue listening. And don't forget that, you know, part of your action as a new director is to listen, and that's a big important part. Don't sacrifice that time thinking you're meant to quote unquote do something, because listening and absorbing really is doing something.
So we'll go on to the second point now, the next slide, which is learn your team. The first point was learn your institution, and you would think that learning your team was part of that, but it's interesting, I think, that Laura's given this a particular emphasis in one of her top 6 actions, so I wondered if she could expand on why that is.
Well, I think they're really different, learning your institution and learning your team. You might think of your team as just simply a piece of the institution, but as the director, you're their one point of contact. So you're the one that they're looking at all the time. And everyone in the institution sees you in a different way. At the same time, the team is looking at you, really holding and concentrating on every single step that you're taking in the beginning. They really do see you in different ways. So number one in this with your team, what's working and what's not. Resist the temptation, if you can, to start changing things that are working straight away. We'll talk about that actually in a minute in more depth. Secondly, evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of individuals within the team and collectively. It's really likely that this is the place where you're going to be spending the most amount of time, really trying to figure out what's going on within that team. What are people telling you? And more importantly, what are they not telling you? Are people saying the same thing, or is everyone telling you something different? Who's making a beeline for your door to make sure they get to tell you what they think? And who's spending a lot of their time making sure that you don't see them and they don't have to tell you what they think? Part of becoming a leader and a new director is really taking the information you're giving, adding your own instinct, asking questions, and then making a decision. Give yourself time, as we said before, if you can, to evaluate things yourself, rather than feeling really pressed to depend upon what others are telling you. Still thinking about the team, remember that change is incredibly frightening for most people. I've heard it said, change is wildly overrated. So if you can, stop yourself from immediately making changes just for the sake of it, just for the fact that you want to put your own imprint on something. If there's a process that's in place and working, just allow it to keep working, at least for the time being. On the other hand, though, if there's something really obvious that isn't working, and you can see that clearly and identify it straight away, then that's a time to really step up and change something. Do it with confidence. Don't be worried if it's really clear to you about going ahead and taking action.
I'm just listening to that. I think one of the themes that is coming through is how quickly a new director identifies and makes changes, and how would you, Laura, think about timing in terms of learning what your team will take in terms of the speed of change?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing about timing, because my feeling as a new director is that you can really use it to address what's happening. So, for example, if you've been brought in specifically to fix something that's broken and you've been giving that directive, then taking small steps right away to make improvements is going to signal that you're able to handle the task you've been given. But alternatively, if your team is really already performing well and you're not meant to necessarily do anything other than take them to the next level, making quick changes just for the sake of it isn't going to gain you anything. As a matter of fact, it might even be perceived as a bit selfish. So that's just going to send a signal that you're not confident and you're not going to let what's working keep working, that really your own needs are more important than the needs of the team. And I think that's something else to really think about here is it isn't just about you. In some ways, you're the director, but you're also a member of the team. So trying to balance, we've used this word before, that kind of feeling about what does it mean to be a director and not necessarily at the same level as other people, but still a member of that team and trying to take things forward.
If you had to say one thing about your team, what would it be?
I think the one most important thing, if I had to give you just one thing to think about working with the team, I'd say whatever you're doing, make sure you really think about the intention behind how you communicate it.
And that's kind of where I come in, really.
Next slide, right?
So next slide, number 3, create a communication strategy. Now, I have been involved in Durham in development communications for about 18 months or so, and it had never occurred to me that it was any part of my role to look at internal communications. So having Laura come in and place such a strong emphasis on internal communications was really interesting from a professional point of view. And not having come in as a new director myself, I imagine the big temptation is to make a grand opening statement about who you are and who you intend to be, plus some dramatic early actions. And they say that firing people is often a way to establish that.
I didn't do that.
No, indeed. But you don't establish your management style by grand statements, because people are watching you all of the time. Everything you do as a new director must communicate who you are, or it does communicate who you are. So your comms strategy needs to develop out of who you are fundamentally. So Laura, I know, places a lot of emphasis on process, data, and transparency. So her communication strategy comes out of that. Consequently, when she arrived, one of the first things she did was create a series of regular meetings, all department meetings, managerial team meetings, prospect meetings, pipeline meetings, and one-to-one meetings, so that everyone could meet with her regularly and discuss progress. She also instituted a series of cross-departmental working groups to stop people working in silos and creating lots of top-down and peer-to-peer communication. On top of this, she put in place some internal communications, a regular Friday email from her to the department, leading an office clean-up day to get rid of those old bits of information and collateral that every office accumulates because no one ever wants to throw anything away. The final aspect, setting objectives and sticking to them, is an obvious thing that a leader needs to do, but it also falls out of Laura's approach to management, which is transparency, process, and data measurement. I think the whole thing about communications, internal communications, is that it must be authentic and genuinely communicate who you are. And this comes out of your values as a manager and a director, rather than being a set of things that you impose because you may think they're a good idea.
It's really interesting because when I hear David talk about these things and the aspects of the communications strategy that I actually think we created together, I hear different, I think back on the 3 separate instances of my becoming a director, not just here at Durham. And the communications issues have actually been one thing that had impact for me in each of those places, but for really different reasons.
And was there a point where you learned the value of an internal communication strategy, or did you always know it was important?
I think more than anything, it was probably inherent in the way I operated as a manager, because I always have thought of myself as putting myself in the shoes of the people that I was managing. It really isn't ever very far from my mind that I either could benefit greatly from a good communicator being in charge, or had in my past, or I'd indeed suffered at the hand of a poor one. So for me, what really started as something instinctive became strategic somewhere along the line. And if you sit as a new director and make a list of all the problems you encounter, or indeed not as a director, just as someone on the team, if you think about what problems you keep encountering over and over again, I'd be really surprised if you didn't find the majority of them come back to communications problems.
Yeah, I'm very keen on that point of view.
Well, yeah, definitely, as the communications manager. But anyway, so that, I think, might be it for the moment on communication.
Yeah, so we're on to number 4, mind your knitting, which is a British phrase. You can imagine what it means, but it means devote yourself to your responsibilities.
And I consider this one, it's one of my, you can tell from my accent that I'm not from the UK originally, but I'm from North America. But I like this mind your knitting idea. To me, it translates as get the basics right. This is something of Alumni Relations and Development 101 checklist that you're looking at here. But you really can't go wrong at the outset with sticking to the basics and using that laundry list, if you will, of what's in place and what's working well and what needs some work. So I know that to some of you, these really sound like simple things, but wherever you are on the continuum of your program, whether you're brand new, a real nascent program with just a few people in post, or you're an incredibly well-developed, mature program, you can still go back to the basics when you're a new director, just to double-check the basic structures of your teams. So, for example, here at Durham, we realized when we went through this basic list pretty early on that there were various members of the team who were tracking information in the database, we use Razor's Edge here, in different ways. And what this meant was that when we went to try to generate reports on what you would consider basic information in order to set objectives for improving our performance, we discovered that we couldn't track that progress as effectively as we wanted to. So that basic realization gave us a very concrete set of activities, which also helped to engage every member of the team in moving forward on something together that we all decided was important and we had to have in place. So just by looking at something basic, we identified something that all the various teams within the department could really get behind and join up together to take forward.
And that created one of the comms opportunities.
Yeah,
in terms
absolutely.
Of working that forward, yeah.
We really had to say, okay, we're going to confirm how we're tracking data. We're going to then do an outreach to the colleges, to other departments who were using the database, and make sure that we could then generate accurate reports. We also realized while we went through this list that there were some serious assumptions that were being made about who was doing what within our department. And one part of the team thought that somebody else was taking responsibility for something that actually had fallen through the cracks. So by minding your knitting, so to speak, we discovered that in a few places we could make immediate improvements with minimal resource while engaging the vast majority of the department. And that felt like something that gave me a sense of accomplishment, but it wasn't all about me. It was really all about the team driving activity by identifying a problem together.
So thinking deeply about the basics.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Creates other opportunities.
And give yourself permission to go back to the basics.
We're going to go on to number 5 now, follow the money, which I think is an American phrase.
Yeah, follow the money.
So how does that operate?
Well, it may seem obvious since you're working, I think, in alumni relations and development, that you want to figure out the finances. But sometimes maybe that falls to the bottom of your list. And what I'd say is make it amongst the first 6 things that you're concentrating on. Start off with the budget. What's the cycle? Has it just been set, in which case you're going to have to figure out what resource you have and what the expectations were for activity in the department based upon historic performance. So that's one really important question. If you arrive and a month later you're expected to submit a new budget, that's very different from coming in halfway through the budget cycle, having a bit of time to really understand how you can put a budget in place to work toward. So it's kind of important to spend a bit of time straight away figuring out where you are in that cycle. Historic performance, who's tracking it? Do you have reports from somebody that you can trust? Is there someone in your team that can take you through them? Speaking from experience, I can tell you that I did start in one post and soon discovered that grand plans I'd heard discussed during the interview process were absolutely not resourced in the current budget. So obviously this would have a considerable impact on what I could do. Targets are sort of the same. Who sets them? How is that done? Is it you? Is it your manager? Is it a combination thereof? It's really important to check in with your alumni relations team and your fundraisers to see what targets they already have in place. What are they working toward? How are they measuring things? Are they measuring engagement just in terms of income or donations? Or are they measuring volunteer activity, web click-through on the website, attendance at events? Again, what's the expectation? Using a concrete example, at another institution I worked at, I was told that the major gifts team was operating against a specific target for meetings and income, and then found actually that they weren't tracking their meeting activity. So despite the fact that they thought they had meeting targets, there was really no way that that was being measured. So the same team was expected to generate specific income, but their individual portfolios actually hadn't been valued. So there really wasn't a way for them to determine whether or not those goals were realistic or indeed being met. So again, just really taking a basic look at your budget and targets early on can help you identify what kind of activity you're going to engage in for the near and far term and how you should spend your time.
So we're on to the next slide now. Final of the 6 actions, direct and delegate, don't micromanage. And it looks to me that this is the essence of the difference between being a director and being a senior manager.
Well, that's certainly, it's one way of looking at it, and I think there is this point, and if you are a new director, you've reached it, where what worked before that made you successful won't work if you keep doing it, because you absolutely have to acknowledge that you can't do everything. So no matter how many late nights you put in, there's just physically no way that you can do everything yourself. So acknowledging that is really the first step in making a decision yourself about your leadership and use of your management team to its fullest extent. This is about empowering others to make decisions. And you won't be surprised to hear that there's a natural tension between when you intervene and when you let something lie. And this is, if you think about it, the essence of the skill of a director. And some of you may already feel like you've got an innate sense just based upon reactions or responses from actions that you've taken in the past. And for others, you'll have to put a little learning knowledge behind what your instinct might tell you to do. I think it's important here to focus on thinking about the ability not to do something because you can park it for a while. This goes with the first bullet, you can't do everything. You want to do everything. You want to really take control of that huge laundry list of activities that's in front of you. but really thinking quite critically, when can you leave something for later? And that's not easy sometimes to figure out, but it is worth thinking about it. When you're new, it's really hard, and you might struggle with this one, but it is important, and we do come back to it in the pitfalls section, so I might leave that one there. What problems can you give away? This might be a little bit about also a different way of thinking about trying not to do everything, but what problems do you really not have to take on? Because they may belong to another team, another department. Don't take them into your own personal list of things to get done if they're problems that can be solved by other people, or indeed by putting together a cross-functional team. And this might take some time. You know, put the list of problems down and say, what do I have to address straight away? What can only be done by me? Where would it benefit for me to reach out? Actually, where would I earn some kind of credibility with other teams and departments by sharing those problems and finding solutions? I think one here, intervene. This is important because sometimes you really do have to direct. You need to step in because you see something going awry, and it's important in that instance